Hello students, let us all continue our chapter, that is life process. Today we are going to talk about the second important process that is very essential in our body, that is respiration. Okay, and what is a respiration? Respiration means the exchange of gases, and in this the animals and plants have different means of exchanging the gases. Exchanging of gases means we are talking about the oxygen and carbon dioxide, how we take in the oxygen and how we exhale the carbon dioxide. So at cellular level, respiration means the burning of food at for gathering the energy needed for the other life processes. So here what does it mean? By the respiration process, we are burning the food and getting the energy, and that energy is utilized for our other life processes. And cellular respiration may take place either in the presence or in the absence of oxygens. So generally when the glucose, that is the food that enters our cell, in the presence of oxygen, what it then generates? It generates the energy, carbon dioxide and water. And energy is stored in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and this can be used for the cell activity, example muscle contraction, and there are other like activities too. So what is ATP? We need to study over here. ATP is the energy currency of the cell. So ATP means it is the energy that is stored in the cell, and ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. So that means the adenine, okay, the adenosine, because adenine and ribose are combined together, and along with it 3 phosphate bonds are there. Okay, and this molecule created as a result of the reactions like photosynthesis and respiration. So this one is produced during the photosynthesis process as well as in the respiration processes. So photosynthesis means we are talking about plants, and respiration means we are talking about animals or the human beings. So here the 3 phosphate bonds present in the molecule are high energy bonds, and when these bonds are broken, a large amount of energy is released. So we are talking about these 3 phosphate bonds. Can you see the bonds? You can see this. These 3 phosphate bonds are joined together by the bonds, okay, and it requires the high energy to be broken, and it releases the large amount of energy. So such released energy is then used for the other metabolic reactions. So here up to now we have studied like through the respiration process energy is released, and that energy is stored in the form of ATP, and in that ATP the phosphate bonds are broken down with high amount of energy, and high energy is released. So this process occurs during the respiration process. So let's talk about the respiration. What is the respiration? The process by which living beings utilize the food to get energy. This is called as the respiration. Okay. And second one is respiration is an oxidation reaction in which carbohydrate is oxidized to produce the energy. And where does this occurs? It occurs in mitochondria, which is called as the site of the respiration. And then the energy released is stored in the form of ATP, and this ATP is stored in mitochondria and is released as per the need. So you can what you have studied over here is during the respiration process the food is burnt to get energy, and this process is called as the respiration. And this respiration is an oxidation reaction in which carbohydrate is oxidized to produce the energy, and this process occurs in the mitochondria. And when this process occurs, ATP is produced, and this ATP is stored in the mitochondria and is used accordingly. Let's talk about the respiration in humans. So human respiratory system is very complex, in which it involves the breathing, the exchange of gases, as well as the cellular respiration. Okay, breathing means breathing in of oxygen, breathing out of carbon dioxide. Exchange of gases means inside our body there are certain parts which undergo the exchange of the gases, and when there is exchange of the gases, then we will talk about the cellular respiration. So it helps in breathing and exchange of gases, as you all know, the respiratory system, and it involves the inhalation and exhalation of carbon dioxide, and the gaseous exchange takes place in the lungs, and oxygen is supplied to all the cells. So what do you have to remember? From the outside, Okay, from the outside, first of all, it what happens? Inhalation and exhalation. Okay, so oxygen gets in and carbon dioxide goes out. So once the oxygen get into the lungs, okay, from the lungs it enters into the cells, and here occurs the cellular respiration, and cellular respiration takes place in each and every cell. So that means how many cells that is present inside our body all undergoes the cellular respiration. So this is inhalation and exhalation, and this is inhalation. Okay, exhalation means release of carbon dioxide, inhalation means taking in the oxygen. What are the steps in the respiration? First part is the breaking down of glucose into pyruvate. So as you all know, in a cell, by the digestion of the food, it is stored in the form, the carbohydrate is stored in the form of glucose. You have studied in the digestive system, right? Or the digestion process. So this glucose will first be converted into pyruvate. Okay. So what will happen? This step happens in the cytoplasm. So this process occurs in the cytoplasm. Okay. When the glucose is converted into the pyruvate, this occurs in cytoplasm. Okay. And what happens? This glucose molecule will be broken down into pyruvic acid. And what is a glucose? It is the 6 carbon atoms. It contains 6 carbon atoms, while pyruvic acid contains only 3 carbon atoms. So that means you can understand the 6 carbon atoms is changed into 3 carbon atoms. That is called as the pyruvate. Now next step is fate of pyruvate. Like pyruvate can undergo in 2 forms. Okay. So the further breakdown of the pyruvate takes place in the mitochondria. Okay, and the molecules formed depend on the type of respiration occurs. So pyruvic acid, it moves to the mitochondria, and next it depends what type of respiration is occurring. And what are the 2 types of respiration? It can be aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. So respiration involves the gaseous exchange, that is intake of oxygen and from the atmosphere, and release of carbon dioxide. This is also called as the breathing process. Then breakdown of the simple food in order to release energy inside the cell. This is called as the cellular respiration. So as I told you, the pyruvic acid, the pyruvate. Okay. So what happens? Once the pyruvate is formed from the glucose. Okay. This process of conversion from glucose to pyruvate occurs in cytoplasm. Okay. And after that, this pyruvate can either undergo aerobic respiration or the anaerobic respiration. So depending upon the type of respiration, let's see what happens. In aerobic respiration, what happens? As it is happening in the presence of oxygen, it will be converted into carbon dioxide and energy is released, and as well as water molecules is also formed as the end of this process. So what happens in anaerobic respiration? As it is due to the absence of oxygen, the pyruvic acid will be either converted into ethyl alcohol or lactic acid. Okay, and ethyl alcohol is generally formed in the anaerobic respiration, like microbes like yeast and bacteria. So what you can understand, this type of respiration occurs in yeast and bacteria. And what do they do? The glucose is converted into first pyruvate, and later though that pyruvate will be converted into ethyl alcohol or the lactic acid. Okay, and lactic acid is formed in some microbes as well as in muscle cells. So that means it occurs in yeast and bacteria and other microorganisms, but sometimes it also occurs in the muscle cells of the organisms as well. So let's see this, what we have studied till now. First process is glucose, which is a 6 carbon molecule, will be converted into pyruvate, which is a 3 carbon molecule, plus energy is released. Next, then if the pyruvate, if it is in yeast, that means there is lack of oxygen. That means I'm talking about anaerobic respiration. So what is produced? Ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide, and energy is released. For example, if this pyruvate is in muscle cells means lack of oxygen, like not enough supply of oxygen is there, then what it will be formed? Lactic acid and energy will be formed. But if the pyruvate is in the presence of oxygen, so what is the end product formed? Carbon dioxide, water, and a lot of energy is produced in this process. So you need to know, in anaerobic respiration, ethyl alcohol or lactic acid is formed, but in the presence of oxygen, carbon dioxide, water and energy is released. And lactic acid is formed mostly in the muscle cells or in some of the microbes. And why does it happens in muscle cells? Because sometimes there is lack of oxygen due to some physical activities. So here is the equation of glucose, that is C6H12O6. That means 6 carbon is present, and when it is in the presence of oxygen, so what it will be formed? 6CO2, 6H2, and energy is released. And if it is in the absence of oxygen, means complete absence, means not even a like minute quantity of oxygen is present. So what will happen? Ethanol, C2H5OH, that is ethanol, and carbon dioxide is produced. But when we are talking about when there is lack of oxygen, means there is the presence of oxygen but it is in small quantity, so then lactic acid is formed in that. You need to remember these three equations, that is very important. So let's have a quick recap over here. 6 carbon molecule, that is glucose, will be converted into pyruvate, that is 3 carbon molecule, and releases some energy, and this process occurs in the cytoplasm. So once the pyruvate is formed, this will be either in the absence of oxygen or lack of oxygen or in the presence of oxygen. So what happens in the absence of oxygen? What is the product formed? It is the ethanol, carbon dioxide and energy. If there is lack of oxygen, so lactic acid and energy is formed. But when there is presence of oxygen, carbon dioxide, water and energy is formed, and all these processes occurs in the mitochondria. You have to remember, glucose to pyruvate occurs in cytoplasm, but the pyruvate to energy release is formed it occurs in mitochondria. So let's have a look on aerobic and anaerobic respiration. In the presence of oxygen is aerobic, in the absence of oxygen is anaerobic. It occurs in mitochondria, it occurs in cytoplasm. End product is CO2 and H2O. End products are alcohol and lactic acid. More amount of energy is released during the aerobic respiration and less amount of energy is released in anaerobic respiration. So the equation would be glucose to pyruvate, CO2, H2O, and energy is released. But here glucose to pyruvate, but sometimes if there is complete absence of oxygen, ethanol is produced, water and energy is released. But if there is small quantity of oxygen, so from glucose to pyruvate, and from pyruvate it will form lactic acid and energy. So there is a question, sometimes we have pain in our muscle cells. What is the reason behind it? So let's have a look over it. Okay. So if someone is running very fast, he may be having a throbbing pain in the muscle cells. Why does it happen? It is because of the anaerobic respiration that is taking place in the muscle cells. Anaerobic respiration means when you are running, so that means when you are running you need more amount of oxygen. Okay, because your muscle cells and all the parts of your body is working very fast. So when there is a condition when you have a very fast physical work, what happens? There might be lack of oxygen. Oxygen is there, but there might be a little lack of oxygen over there. So because of that, there is the anaerobic respiration taking place. For example, this is the muscle cells. Okay, you are running, this is your thigh cells. Okay, so while doing the activity, first the oxygen was very normal, the supply of oxygen was very normal in the cell. But once you started doing the activity, what happens? There is complete, not complete, like the supply of oxygen was reduced. So when the supply of oxygen was reduced in this cell, what happened? There was anaerobic respiration in which lactic acid was generated. So during the running, the demand of energy for the muscle cells increases. So this is compensated by anaerobic respiration, and in which lactic acid is formed. Okay, and because of the deposition of this lactic acid, there is the pain in the muscle cramps. That is why whenever you have a muscle cramp, you have to massage it over there. Once you will massage, what will happen? There will be complete flow of the oxygen to the cell, and then again that lactic acid will be broken down to form the energy. So let's talk about the exchange of gases. How does it happen? For aerobic respiration, what happens? Organisms need a continuous supply of oxygen and carbon dioxide to be produced. During the process, need to be removed from the body. Different organisms, they have different methods of taking in oxygen and giving out the carbon dioxide. For example, diffusion occurs. Okay, diffusion is the method which is utilized by unicellular cells. Unicellular cells means single celled organisms. They mostly undergo the diffusion process. Okay, diffusion means when there is the movement of the materials from the higher concentration to the lower concentration, that is called as the diffusion process. Even in plants also, by the process of diffusion, like there is exchange of gases. In complex animals, the respiratory system does not have the job of exchange of gases. So gills are the respiratory organs in fishes, and they take in oxygen which is dissolved in the water through the gills. This is you have studied in your lower classes. So the availability of the oxygen in the aquatic environment. So the breathing rate of the aquatic organism is also faster. For example, if I give you an example of a fish, you must have seen they open their mouth, sometimes they open up their mouth and they close it rapidly. Why do they do? Because the availability of oxygen is less in aquatic environment. So that is why they have to breathe faster to get the oxygen demand. Okay. So in the same way, insects also have a system of spiracles and tracheas which is used for taking in oxygen. And what does the terrestrial organisms do? They have the lungs for the exchange of gases. And availability of oxygen is not a problem in the terrestrial environment, so breathing rate is lower as compared to what it is in fishes. As the terrestrial environment is complete with the oxygen, so breathing rate will be slower as compared to the aquatic conditions. So that's it all for today. We have studied about the respiration process in humans and some of the diffusion process in other organisms. So we will be talking about, or we will be continuing our next topics in our next video. Till now, we have finished some of half of the chapter. We will be continuing our chapter in our next videos. So wait for the next video. Till then, bye everyone.